Hello and welcome to the Screen Composers Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. Erica Procunier is a rising star in the screen composing scene. After deciding early on that composing for picture was her passion, she completed a master's in music composition from the University of Western. While building her credits, she was accepted into prestigious programs like the Canadian Film Centre's Slate Music Family Lab and the highly competitive Berlinale Talents, which is held in Berlin each year. She now splits her time composing for independent films, including a Now Award from our sponsor, starring Bruce Greenwood, television shows such as Apple TV Plus's Emmy Award-winning Ghostwriter, CBC's Detention Adventure, and teaching film scoring at Humber College. We chat about the intense sink or swim adventure that was her first apprenticeship, how she pushes her ideas to their full potential without worrying about getting turned down, and her thoughts on one of the biggest potential threats to screen composing and human culture in general, artificial intelligence. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating and sharing the episode with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. And now please enjoy my conversation with Erica Procunier. Erica, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great to be talking to you today. I'm really excited to have our chat. We've known each other for quite a while, actually, and it's really interesting because I feel like we've sort of been waving at each other across the way as we've been on the journey of this this crazy career called screen composing.
Yeah, we met right at the start, like right when I arrived in Toronto, basically.
Right. So when we were chatting the other day, you said something kind of interesting. You said that in terms of how you started, you just kind of made the decision to become a film composer at the age of 16.
I'm guessing that it was 16, yeah. And it's kind of very funny because I don't actually hear a lot of people admit that they did that. And I don't know if it's more common than that, but most of the stories I hear about people who are working in the field is that, you know, they just fell into their lap, and all of a sudden they got really successful doing these side films, and then all of a sudden it's their main gig. But I don't know, it became something of a thing to me when I was 16, and I kind of got obsessed, and then I just had tunnel vision for the next 15 years or whatever to just see if I could do it. And I did it. What did you see, or what did you come across that kind of made you go, oh, this, first of all, that was inspiring enough, and then secondly, where you went, oh, this is a job you can do? Well, I think it was listening to the sort of like the backside of the cassette tape when I was little. Like there would be, you know, I'm thinking specifically of the Lion King soundtrack where there was, you know, all the musical theater songs that they put in on the front side, and then on the back side there's all these score pieces by Hans Zimmer, and I was like, oh, this is like such amazing music. And I was like, that's like, this is a thing that you can do. And then I was writing a lot of music at that point, like just on the piano, like experimenting and stuff like that. And the type of stuff that I wanted to write, like I was like really wanting to expand past the piano and use like orchestra, but like I didn't really have that at my fingertips. Like I didn't play in an orchestra. I was just a piano player. And so it just was something that I was really drawn to. And I started looking into it. This is like late 90s, and there wasn't a whole lot out there on how to do it. And I think that just made me want to do it even more. Like there wasn't a program in school, at least in Canada, where you could learn how to be a film composer. And I was one side of me was so disappointed that there wasn't like a program like going to med school or something where you did your undergrad, and then you did your MCAT, and then you did 4 years of med school, and then you did a residency, and then you were a doctor, basically. And that's really difficult, right? Like that's a really difficult program, but I was so disappointed that there wasn't like a set pathway.
And you also said, you know, in addition to sort of finding that there was no clear path or like a direction or you know, a sort of way forward that was clear to you. You also said you didn't really see a lot of women in the industry as well, that sort of you could look to and say, oh, I'll model my career after this person, or this person is inspiring to me.
Yeah, there was only a couple, and but they were really inspiring, like Anne Dudley and Rachel Portman, Wendy Carlos. Like those were the kinds of people that I saw, and I was just upset that there wasn't more, because in my opinion, like I was, listening to the music that I was writing and like knew that I could write, and I was like, there's zero difference between me and them. Like if I wanted to write a war epic, like that really interested me, and all the women were getting these like rom-com sort of lighthearted stuff, and it wasn't like the heavy stuff. So
do you feel like that's changing now?
Oh yeah. It's so much better than back in the 90s when I was like formulating this plan in my head. But I mean, occasionally you come across an opinion that like, oh, well, we picked you because you're a woman and this story is about a woman, or we just really wanted a feminine spin on this. And like, I don't really think my gender like applies to the kind of music. Like I can write masculine music and feminine music, and I'm, men have been writing feminine films that need feminine music for decades. So I just don't understand that mindset. But at the same time, if someone's going to come to me and say, we'd really like, your perspective on this story, like, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to see what's in that story for me to get inspired by. So this is such an interesting conversation that I've been having with so many people lately, because there's sort of two sides to this coin. I think there's, there are the men who have to understand what the position is of women and what their real experience has been, and to listen to that and to acknowledge it for what it is, and not try and sort of diffuse it or say, well, maybe it's like this, or maybe you're misunderstanding something. And then secondly, the thing that's really come up a lot lately, people start to question, this is women, start to question whether they're being picked for the right reasons. Am I being picked for my music? Am I being picked because I'm the best person for the job? And I guess it's just, an awkward kind of transitionary phase that we're in, where we are trying to, create more opportunities and make sure that we are, giving people a chance that deserve chances. But I guess just, there is always that question, I suppose. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. Because, I mean, in my opinion, there is always this fight right now between like diversity, of like expanding the types of voices that are out there and being heard, and sort of a meritocracy situation where like the best story or the best music should be the one to do it. And I guess my opinion on that topic is that there is no such thing as a true meritocracy. And no matter what you do, like you'll never fully achieve it, because there's not really a method of getting something truly objective.
What do you think about blind auditions, where they're not attaching names, credits, or anything to the submissions? Just here's the music, listen to it. Do you think it fits? That's it.
I think it's good, but I think there's a lot more that goes into the hiring of a person, because the whole industry is based on your ability to trust the person to do the job. Like it's the music, yes, but also like, can they deliver to the deadline that we need? How fast can they write? But again, all of that stuff is starting to create barriers for people who maybe don't have as much experience as other people. So I think you have to be careful about that stuff.
I just want to go back again to how you came up. Where did you go to school, and what was your experience of that?
I went to Western University. So I did my undergrad 4 years of theory and composition there as a piano player, but I quickly switched from playing piano, as I never intended to be a performer. I knew very early, even when I applied to to do school, that I wanted to compose. I did not want to perform. And I just knew that I wasn't, you have to be so perfect. And I didn't have that going for me. So I did my 4 years, and then I did another 2-year degree with my master's in composition at Western. And that was like, I felt a little afraid, I think is kind of the reasoning behind that, where like, I know that when I'm in this job, I don't really need this piece of paper to prove anything. Yeah. Except that at that moment in my life, I was really terrified of leaving school, actually. Like, I was really? Like, this is something that I just wanted to learn more stuff, I think. And so I did an extra 2 years, and that was exactly what I needed. I was like exhausted by then. I was like, get me out of here.
Yeah, there's kind of a connection between those two things. How you felt at 16, where you said there's no clear path. You wish there was a more set path. And then when you're in school, I mean, you're being challenged constantly, and it's a pressurized environment. But at least you know, if I study and do this and do that, then I'll get this and I'll get these grades, and I can move forward with this. You know, there's a structure to it. You know what you're doing every day, where you're supposed to show up. It's kind of funny. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges of doing this as a career, or frankly, the career of any freelancer, is the fact that you really just kind of make it up every day as you go along, and things change on a dime. And, you know, you could be, working 20-hour days for a week one time, and then you could be out of a job for the next 3 months, because you teach at Humber, right? Is that I do. Yeah. So how do you talk to you about your students about that aspect of it?
Well, they haven't asked me this year yet. You just have to eventually trust that things are going to work out. I was very worried for a long time. Like when I went out into the real world, and I was like, pounding the pavement, trying to meet people, trying to get jobs. And I was, there's so much anxiety around, like, where's the next job going to come from? But eventually you just realize, like, well, if I look into the past, the jobs did come, even if I didn't even know where the next one was going to be. You kind of have to trust that the opportunities are going to come, but you have to be ultra prepared for the moment that those opportunities show up.
What do you think about the James Cameron quote, "Hope is not a strategy"? I often think about that because, there is this kind of like, it's a weird double-edged sword that we always live by, which is, on the one hand, you're going, this is crazy. It's completely chaotic. But I know somehow it's going to work out, and you don't know why. Like, it's not rational in a way. And then I think about that James Cameron quote, and I go, well, yeah, but there has to be a strategy to what I'm doing. So if you tell someone, well, things will just work out, and they go, great, and they just sit at home and make music and don't do anything else, it's not going to work out.
No. Well, you have to, there's so many facets to this job. Like, I think one of the things that I do also tell my students is that this job is you're not just a composer. You're a business person. You're an accountant. You do your own payroll. Like, you're a marketing executive. Like, you have to go out and you have to, like, network. Like, there's an aspect to deciding at 16 to do this job that does have a strategic element to it as well, where, like, as soon as I realized that, like, I'd have to go out and I'd have to meet people, I was like, okay, well, I better turn into a
hustler, or
no, like an extroverted person where I can actually have a conversation with anybody that I just happen to meet. So.
Right. Yeah. And that's not for everyone. Or a lot of people, I think, struggle with that. So that's an interesting one for sure. This idea of creating opportunity and just sort of the kind of like, I don't know, when people ask me, how does this work? I go, frankly, I don't really know. I can't really tell you, other than give you strategies and things that I think have worked for me and things that you want to consistently do. But ultimately, like, why something works or doesn't work, or why things turn out the way they do, and why there sort of seems to be a consistent thread with everyone you talk about that's sort of been successful with this, was something that was introduced to me as a very powerful idea back when I did the apprentice mentor program with the Screen Composers Guild. And this is going back like 13 years now. And we actually, you and I mentored under this same person, Donald Kwan.
Yes.
For me, that was hugely formative. Donald's a very unique guy, and he's got very interesting perspectives, and he really opened my mind to a lot of things and changed the way I was thinking about my career and about life in general. What was your mentorship like with Donald, and what did you take away from that?
Oh, that was a really interesting intro into the industry for me. I am the kind of person who, I don't know if you can tell already, but like I like the structure and I like programs. And I got matched with Donald, which was really like a intense introduction into the real world of film scoring. And there's so much stuff about this job that you can't learn in a textbook or you can't learn in school necessarily. And I was working for him for about 8 months, but very quickly it all came crashing down in like one day. There was 4 projects on the go, and he had a stroke on stage, and he was in a coma. So me and his other assistant, Shin, we basically were thrown into the fire. And I mean, we could have just sort of, closed up shop, but we said, we got to finish these projects for Donald.
Wow.
Like, what are they going to do? Like, the deadline's in a week. Like, we have to do this. So, Donald's in a coma, and we went and we helped out these productions, and we finished them, and we were just the assistants. Like, we did know what we were doing because we had a great mentorship from Donald. And I think everybody was, so stressed out in that time, and they were just thankful that, we were there to sweep up the pieces and keep the whole project together without having it fall apart. But that was a huge learning experience, because that does not really happen every day, that somebody trusts you when you're just an assistant like that to
absolutely
put
and just hands you
together.
the reins of everything. Was there I can only imagine the reaction on the part of the producers of these shows when you said so there's a bit of an issue, and we're going to have to take over. Was there ever a thought that there would be a different path forward, or was it just like, we don't have a choice? Or was it that you'd already built the trust and the relationship with those producers that made them feel comfortable to move forward?
There was 4 projects still on the slate, and we didn't do one of them, but the 3 others we ended up doing. One, I think, was because the deadline was, in 2 or 3 days or something, 5 days, something like that. And then the other, they already knew that we had been composing on the show, and we had been working with Donald, and we were able to deliver. So we were able to instill that trust that you need in that situation, because I think that's really what everybody's looking for. Everything I learned from Donald is invaluable. And then he I think a lot of you might already know Donald, but he did make a great recovery, and he's back to composing now. And we actually ended up working together still, even after he came back from his coma. Yeah, and so that was my intro to the industry, basically.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. Right into the crucible off the bat. That must have been an intense learning experience. I want to talk a little bit about the CFC, the Canadian Film Centre, which is a wonderful institution set up by famed filmmaker Norm Jewison, where they invite producers, directors, actors, and now screen composers and songwriters to come up and basically do a residency. And it's a very competitive program. It is across Canada that people come and do this. And you were lucky enough to be chosen for this. Tell me a little bit about that situation. That was another one that I'm sure was very intense and all-encompassing. What was it like being at the CFC?
Oh, I love the CFC so much. Oh my goodness. It warms my heart to even think back to that time in my life. The CFC is just like a family, I think. And it was just a lovely experience. It's more than just school. It's you get all these new relationships happening with all these creative, like-minded people. And I found some really great lasting relationships through the CFC, like in work, but also just in social friendships.
If you had advice for people that are looking to get into that program or applying for it, what would you say to them?
Show your true musical voice in your application. That you're wanting to be a really intense storyteller. Like you really care about getting that sort of aspect of it. It's not just about the music. It's about supporting what is happening on screen and really, becoming one with the movie. It's sometimes I hear some people say that they really like the kind of music that is in movies and they want to write that kind of music. And it's like, well, that's great. Maybe you should write an album that sounds like movie music instead. Like I think the whole point is that, you're telling a story, a visual story, and you're supporting that visual story with all the tools in your toolbox, basically.
And it's such a collaborative thing too. I mean, you're dealing with other people who have their own vision and basically working as a translator, for their cinematic vision. How do you turn that into music? How do you meet those demands and those requests?
Exactly. One
One of your more recent projects is Ghostwriter, which you did for Apple TV Plus, and that recently won an Emmy Award for I think it was best. What was it? Best series? Best
children's series.
That's amazing.
They didn't even know that they were nominated for that.
What?
It's weird. I think there was a funny accounting error, and they knew that they were nominated in a lot of the craft categories and the writing categories, but they didn't know that they were in the running for the big award for that. And then they won it, and then everyone was like, "Oh, girl, like that's awesome!" So,
Well, that's great. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I want to talk about that show, but it's funny how you've sort of had this, to a certain degree luck, but also because of your talents, you've gotten into another very prestigious and very competitive program at Berlinale, which happens in Berlin in Germany every year. And you have a kind of another intense story about sort of being thrown into the crucible at the beginning of that show.
I got hired on Ghostwriter, and I said, well, I'm already accepted into Berlinale, and I have to go to Berlin for 2 weeks. Is this going to be an issue? And they're like, no, that sounds fine. And what they really meant by that was, you're going to figure out the schedule, right? Like you're going to just sort of work this 2-week gap in. And I think they thought I might be able to compose while I was in Berlin. And I was like, no, that's not going to work out.
Wow.
Because as you know, Berlinale Talents is a, it's an intense week of a festival where you're going to workshops and you're doing seminars and going to, talks and stuff, and you're up late and you're meeting people and you're having lunches and coffees, and it's an amazing program, and I had such a great time. But I would not have had time to compose. But I had an amazing help by our mutual friend Janelle. So she came in and helped me so that I could actually go to Berlinale and keep my ghostwriter job. So thank you, Janelle.
What was it like working on that show? What were the first discussions with the showrunners like, and what was the approach?
The show is this sort of reboot of a 90s show, which I actually watched when I was little. So this was, so ecstatic for me when there's a code word that they use for the show, which I don't think I should say, but but so when I had demoed on it, I just knew the code word, but then I was reading it and I was like, this is Ghostwriter. Like I know what show this is.
Okay, right.
Because I watched it, but I never found out who the ghost was when I was little because I could never watch it enough days in a row.
Right.
Anyway, the approach was completely different. Like it wasn't sort of any throwback to anything that really was in the 90s show, except that there is this ghost that shows up and it helps kids learn to read and think about literature. If you go and listen to the old Ghostwriter theme song, it's like everybody remembers it, like in my peer group. And it's one of these sort of early 90s where they kind of threw in as much contemporary elements as they could. So like, there's a record scratch, and then there's a sax solo, and then there's like all this beatboxing and like everything in between. Like, it's intense. So I thankfully I didn't have to reference that in the new Ghostwriter. The new Ghostwriter is very much like kind of taking this like ghosty, like sort of industrial revolution kind of aspect to it, kind of like the Sherlock from the BBC. So I use like a lot of like dulcimers and orchestra. And then every couple episodes, there's a new story arc where, we had Alice in Wonderland, and we had like Frankenstein, and we kind of did a little bit of an approach that was customized to that little storyline that was coming out. So
that's fun.
Yeah.
You also work on a CBC's Detention Adventure, which is another kid series. How do you think about the two of those, like in terms of the age groups and the kind of music that you're writing for those? Is there a different approach?
Personally, I don't want to dumb the music down for an age group. I think we sometimes underestimate children and like what they're open to, because they're actually like much more open to anything than adults even are, I think. So like I know we had talked about this earlier, whereas like you watch some stuff from the 80s and like the music is insane and it's like contemporary and it's like dissonant and it's for kids, and it's like this actually works. Like this, like kids don't think this is weird. They don't have anything to compare it to. So I go for like a mature approach to everything if I can, and then occasionally I'll be asked to pull back by producers where it is sometimes, if things are a little too scary, that can be an issue, because they don't want things to be scary.
That's a really tricky line, I find. That always gives me pause when I get those kinds of notes. Like it's good, but it's to this or to that, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, because like, what is the difference between something that is truly scary and something that is spooky or scary but more for kids, or like, what's the difference between something that's too sad and too heartbreaking and something that suggests sadness and is appropriate for kids?
I know. It is a tricky line. Like, I will just do what I think is what should be done, and then if people want to pull it back, then they can, because I wouldn't want to be too conservative and then have it be just sort of like blah.
So do you find sometimes you're actually delivering stuff and you're going, I went to 100 here, and they'll probably ask me to pull back, but I want to give it a shot anyways?
Yeah, I do that. And I mean, there's a show that I'm currently working on, and there's some pretty intense, like almost like action scenes, and but we're still in this stage where we're coming up with the entire tone for the show. Right. And this is the moment where it's like, well, this doesn't fit in with the tone of our show. This is like really intense. And our show is not that dangerous, basically, is how it kind of goes. And so then I have to, kind of redefine the boundaries of what the show has in its musical possibilities.
This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online @ScreenComposers. And now, back to our show. The word trust comes up a lot when we've been talking, and I think you said yourself that that's one of the things that you are most focused on nurturing with your collaborators. I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Zach Birnbaum, because you guys have worked on a bunch of different things together. How did you guys meet, and what sort of spurred you to work together?
So Zach and I have met probably back in like 2011 or 2012. And he had just been hired to do his first feature film. Mm-hmm. And he contacted me. I don't know how he found me. I think he might have just found me on the internet with like a website, which people say to me, they're like, that's unheard of. Yeah. I'm like, well, not anymore. Now people just find you online. But I guess, you know, I did always think like how important it is to have an online presence. So I actually like taught myself how to make my own websites like way back in the day.
Yeah, me too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of like a I don't know how this works, so I'm going to figure it out kind of.
Yep.
But so we worked on a film called And Now a Word from Our Sponsor. And that starred Bruce Greenwood and Parker Posey. And the premise was this guy has a little bit of like a mental breakdown, and he's an ad executive, and then he can only communicate using ad slogans. So it was interesting comedy. So that was fun. That was a lot of fun. And then after that, we just continued to work together. Whenever he was making films, and came up with, you know, a really good shorthand with how to communicate to each other about the score. And he really does listen, and he doesn't temp his films because he knows that I don't want to hear the temp, and he doesn't even want to hear the temp because he's afraid of getting too used to it. And he wants the scenes to work perfectly without score, because otherwise, you know, you're kind of using score as a crutch to make the scene edit properly. And
that's wonderful. Yeah, that open slate is so great. I recently saw a post online in one of a composer groups, and someone was exclaiming how excited they were because they got a cut of a film from the director, and it was temped with their own music, and they were so happy. And I thought, that sounds awful.
I mean, it's not only are you if you're listening to yourself, it's even harder to not self-plagiarize, because that's like something that inherently came out of you, right?
Yeah.
It's like a well-worn sort of record groove. Like, I don't know that I would like that, because I always come up with something new and customized to each film. Yeah,
for me, it's always a filtering process. I listen to what they've done as the temp. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's terrible, which I think is super helpful. And I'm not being facetious. And then sometimes it's so good that it's scary, and you're like, oh, great. How do I beat this? But I'm always thinking like, okay, what is it? What's inherently, it's a great place to start talking about music, I find, because you're like, okay, what's working about this? What do you like? What do you feel works? What doesn't work? And don't talk about the instrumentation. Talk about like the feeling of it, or the emotional thing, or the narrative that's being helped by this. And so I don't know. I feel like I don't mind temp as long as they haven't become addicted to it. You know, that I think it's a helpful thing.
I like temp when things have to go fast. Honestly, it's like, you know, when I was doing Ghostwriter, I had to write a whole episode in a week, and, you know, there was like 17 to 20 minutes of music that I had to do. So I was like, you know, I was like at a good pace, like 5 minutes a day would be lovely to get out. And, you know, if I had to spend the time to think about all of the placements of the music from scratch, that would be a little bit more difficult. But and I love doing that work if I have the time, of course. Like, you want to just like inherently feel the drama and stuff like that. Going back to Zach for a moment, and again on this topic of trust, for the announcement, which is one of the more recent things you did with him, you took the music in a different direction. Like the types of things that I had been working on lately, like, didn't have a lot of room for creative expression and experimentation. And so I was really craving a project where I could do some weird stuff. And he was making something, it was like a COVID project. He actually had filmed it, like, I think he filmed it on March 1st. I think that one was really great, because he did have to trust that you know, what I was coming up with and the process that I was going through was going to be worth it, if you know what I mean. Like,
right. Yeah.
And he had to, be quite open-minded in terms of where we could go with this. And I think it was a good experiment and exercise. So like it did have that cacophony, sort of chaotic like aspect to it. Like I wanted to like layer things so much that like you couldn't really hear the meter very well, and like it's just kind of all over the place, and it makes sense in the story as well, because it's one of these stories, it's like a one-shot short film where you kind of the camera's its own character, and it like moves through the house like discovering this situation as it unfolds, right? And it's not a happy story by any means. So
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, there was a story-based reason for doing what you did. And I think that's always so important, is that being able to justify something not because you like this or you like that or you think it would be really cool, but rather, I think the story needs this, or I think it would be a great opportunity for us to explore that.
It certainly needed something unique to itself. I'm a huge fan of a lot of like aleatoric music, and like Mika Levy's score to Under the Skin really inspires me in a way, and I wish I could have like a film that needed something like that.
I get that as a reference so much these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like in the horror world right now, that's like Thomas Newman's American Beauty.
Oh man.
It just, again, and you get just like, oh yeah, I really like the score. What's it? Beneath the Skin, I think like Mika Levy's. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. I know. No, don't even send me I know what it is.
I guess the thing for me is like, I would want to apply it to situations that aren't horror films. Like, if that makes sense. Like I want like weird stuff in kind of normal, a little bit more normal moments. Like it makes sense for a horror film to sound like that. Sure. Right. Yeah. But I don't know. Like, do you consider Under the Skin a horror film?
I mean, there are horror elements. I don't know. I guess it depends on your definition of horror. I mean, genres sometimes are kind of stupid, because you could think of it as a sci-fi, you could think of it as a thriller, a psychological thriller. You could just think of it as a weird art house experimental film. I mean, there's so much going. It's a very slow burn movie. It's like not a lot happens. And then a lot of it is sort of, I mean, if you think about this being about an alien that comes to planet Earth and, does these sort of heinous things, but it's not really what, like when you see it happening, it's like very gestural and artistic and kind of like suggestive of things, and not directly related, like this is what's actually happening,
Yeah, like it's like very abstract.
It's very abstract. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
I don't know. I guess what I get interested in is like, making something a little more abstract using the music instead of like the film itself being the thing that is being the abstract thing.
This is so interesting to me, because this is something I think about often. We seem to be at this point, I think, in most mainstream and even in like indie films, there's a certain approach that seems to almost be, even though it's like such an artificial thing within stories, there's a certain way to say certain things.
Yeah.
And I remember I was watching Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman. It was a Japanese movie. And the score was at times just like so counter and so juxtaposing against picture. And it was like, you'd have these scenes and it's like, these two things, they don't go together, but it suggests something else. And it's just, it felt, I don't want to say alien, but it just kind of like went, whoa, that's interesting. Like, I really love those textures. I really like that, the play against things that isn't necessarily a narrative thing. Like, it wasn't trying to suggest something. It was just going, well, what about this here? Why not?
Yeah.
And I think that's so cool. That's sorry, I would like to remember to push things in that direction whenever possible.
I think it's a really interesting choice. Like, I would love, there's a couple of things I'd love to do. And one of them is do that. Like with a contemporary film, is just, or, even a period picture, just go like completely sort of abstract, dissonant, like just all like very experimental with the score.
Yeah.
There is a movie that did that I saw at TIFF. I can't remember what year it was, but it was called Mary Queen of Scots, and it's not the current one that came out in the last couple of years, but they used it's not actually an original score. I think it's Sophia Gubaidulina, and it's like licensing a lot of her music. So if you're familiar with her compositions, you'll know that they're very they're very aggressive, in my opinion, and they're certainly like not in any sort of functional harmony territory, and it just makes this period piece like very horrific. Like it brings out a lot of it adds a lot of complexity to like what the characters are feeling, and like how strange it might be to be in this situation where, you know, it's this power struggle, and you know, people are going to get their heads cut off. So
that's really cool.
Yeah. So I really wanted to period dramas, and I want to treat it like with crazy contemporary score, but I would also love to do like Jane Austen, like just go crazy and write like, you know, something really, really classical.
Wow.
On a
cool.
film score. That would be one of my goals, I would say.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, it's important to have goals and things you're shooting for. On the subject of experimentation and finding unique approaches, one of the things you said to me when we were speaking earlier was that you're looking to explore your own artistry personally to you, like personal to you, as opposed to things that you're doing for other people or for a project or based on a brief. Can you talk a little bit about where your head is at this point with that?
I mean, I guess I've been doing this for about 10, 11 years. And I had such tunnel vision, Adrian. Like, I mean, you know, since I was 16, like I was like, what can I do to be successful? And so I was always thinking a lot about like, you know, what do I want to sound like to get hired? What do I want to, I don't know. I mean, there was an aspect of me just being me.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the same time, I was, you know, I'm very much like, oh, I have to get jobs, and I have to, you know, make myself into something that is in demand right now. And I know like that wasn't a mistake or anything, but at the same time, like all of a sudden, like when you start getting hired on things where you end up like pumping out that music all the time, you start feeling a little bit like a factory. It's not music for me anymore. And so I do know that now I've come to a moment where I need to seek out like projects like The Announcement with Zach, where there is a lot of freedom in what I can explore, but also like I think I need to focus on and carve out some time to create my own artistic sound that's separate from what I'm doing otherwise.
Do you have an idea of what that looks like? Like, would you create a narrative for yourself to work to? Would it be just completely free form? You're doing whatever comes to you. Is it based on something external, or just whatever whim happens to come your way at the time?
I think I have to just let it happen, but I have to carve out the time. And I think that's one of the key things. And I have to set like a deadline for myself to like make, like if I'm going to make like an album or something.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I might go back to my piano.
Do you have a sense, like, what do you think about the idea of voice? Like, this is people often say, well, you have to find your voice. Is your voice something that you need to find? Is it something that's always there? Is it something that's irrepressible and can get buried but never really goes away? What's your feeling on that?
You have to, no matter what, still be true to yourself, because it's not beneficial to you to sound like all these other people, right? Like it doesn't make sense to be like, well, I can be a dupe for whoever.
Yeah.
Like a cheap one, right? Like that's not really going to get you as far. Like I don't want to be like another John Williams or another Hans Zimmer. Like that doesn't help me.
Do you have a sense of what your voice is? Like, do you feel that when you start this project, whatever it ends up being, that you're going to be like, what do I even want to say? Or are you like, no, I got it. This is just going to come out.
I think I have a very specific way that I approach like harmony and melody. Like I'm very melody heavy, and I just love melody so much. Like, you know, when trends kind of go away from having a lot of melody in them, I'm like, no, but just pull it back a bit. Like, I grew up in this like sort of 90s, like Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys, like Moulin Rouge, like mainstream stuff at that time. And like, of course I have this, all this other interest in the classical realm as well. But like, I don't know what would come out. Like I know that it won't have words. That's all I really know so far.
Well, that's exciting territory. We're talking about personal expression, something very unique to yourself as a human being. Something that you also think about a lot is what happens when non-human beings are making music. And you actually were on a podcast recently talking about this stuff. Erica, do you think the machines are coming for us?
No. I mean, I don't think we should be afraid of the computers that write music, at least like in terms of expression.
Right.
But maybe economically we should be. I don't know exactly.
Why does this interest you? What prompted you to sort of get into this?
I don't know. I was just thinking about, I was trying to think as far into the future as I could, essentially. And I don't think a lot of people understand like where this is going. Or they just don't think that it's gonna really come out in the next like 5 to 10 years, which is like what I really do think is things move exponentially, just like in any other department of the world where we're talking about like what it means when AI comes about. I think we do have to think about what it means when AI is able to do all of the creative things that we as humans are able to do, because very easily you can start replacing certain aspects of a film or television show, and music is going to be one of them. Like, and I think we need to decide if that's appropriate. If an AI writing the score, what does that turn our society into? Just like if an AI was going to write the script, like now you've subtracted like a human voice, like a human opportunity for expression. And that's really what our culture is like us telling our stories. And if there's less opportunities for us to tell our stories, and reflect that back towards us, like what do we turn into? Like the AI is suddenly telling us these stories that they're not human stories. They're a shadow of what it thinks that we are. So, and I think that we have to just be careful, because computer programmers are preoccupied right now with trying to figure out if they can make computers write music, and they will be able to do it. Like, there's no question that that's on the scale of they'll write, they'll be able to make notes put together, but they'll never be able to create something that makes you feel the way a Beethoven sonata is on the other side of the scale. Where do you tilt on that scale? Oh, they'll be able to do that. Like it's all finding patterns. Like a Beethoven sonata is a pattern of music. Like I don't think that they're not going to be able to do it. But it's a shadow. Like they'll be able to make what's a shadow of a Beethoven sonata. And they'll be able to make a shadow of a Bach fugue. Do
you think that that's sort of what we do in a way? Because when I think about it, I mean, an extremely complex neural network is starting to resemble, in terms of its action, what a human brain does. And not talking about AI necessarily, but in terms of machine learning, you are feeding into the machine all these examples of things and saying, what is the commonality? What are the patterns? Put it together and now make something that where you synthesize something new out of all these things. And in a way, I feel like that's kind of what we're doing all the time. We're like like you're saying, you've got the little bit of 90s, you've got the classical music, you've got all these different interests and things that make up Erica. And then every time someone asks you to make something, you're going, great, let me filter it through everything that I've got in me. And isn't machine learning kind of doing the same thing?
It is. I don't know that I don't think I'm arguing that that's not what we do either. I think what I'm saying is, do we want to have our stories that we have, assimilated and regurgitated and all our influences? I don't know. Does it make it more valid because we're humans to say these stories? I mean, it is what we contribute to our culture. And I think that's the key to everything.
Okay, so let me ask you the impossible. Make a prediction for us. What do you think the world of music looks like 20 years down the road?
I mean, it depends. There's some key decision making, I guess, that will have to happen. Like, I think computers can already compose. Like, they can put, a string of notes together. They might not be perfectly, with the quality that we expect yet, but it will be. And then once they crack the actual production side of this music and make it sound good, there's not really going to be any difference between a human composing something and a computer, except the computer's going to be way faster, let's be honest.
And cheaper.
Yep. And so the computer is going to be put inside video games, and it's going to spit out, you could have a different score every time you played a video game. Like, that's completely going to happen.
Right.
Someone has to put that score into the computer game. So, maybe there's a new job that exists where somebody is in charge of like programming the score generator. That could be a thing. And like, putting the markers in for the beats that need to be hit. Stuff like that. You don't need to be as adept at composing music as we are. Like, something is going to be decided where certain jobs are still going to be composed by humans, and certain jobs are going to be composed by an AI bot that's built into a film editing program that comes with the software you buy. I think that's what will happen. I just think that, we have to decide as a culture, like, and not just in the music department, but just in general, like, do we want our culture to be reflected back at us from the eyes of an AI, or do we want it to be real people, like, doing this stuff? It's easier to compare it to script writing or like book writing or something. Yeah. Where you would say, oh, absolutely not. I don't want my stories to be written by a computer. But then, when you start getting into pop music and like lyric writing, the lines start getting blurrier. And then when you get to score to picture, it's even blurrier too, because, you're combining human work with AI work, and it's a little blurry. So
I wonder if it'll end up being something like, what's happened with certain, for the last 10 years or so, we've seen a sort of renaissance of the LP and vinyl. Analog of any kind has sort of become, boutique and very sought after. And now we're even seeing, old style cassettes coming back. I mean, these are the bane of my existence back in the day when you wanted to record something, you're trying to do your 4-track, and you're like, do I use Dolby or not? It's hissy and horrible. But then if you use a Dolby, then it just dulls the sound. You're like, it's so frustrating. And now people are like, yeah, I'm listening to my cassette tapes again. I'm like, what is going on? What is going on? And I wonder, if what'll happen is that it'll just become this very rare artisanal kind of like sought after thing that is more, it's not in everything, but when you really want to go whole hog and have something unique and special, you hire a real person to make the music. And it's like, wow.
I don't know what's going to happen. I think, we're talking about this just like in a microcosm of film right now, but like, what's going to happen in the rest of the world? Are we all of a sudden going to get a basic income and everybody's going to be having so much more free time to like sit around and do the stuff they want? Maybe like everybody's just going to start writing all their own music all the time. Like, I don't really know what's going to happen, but I can see this like, you know, if you go completely positive on it, it ends up being this like lovely utopian society where we all get to be self-expressing all day, every day. And then, you know, the other way is that, you know, we're all, you know, shut out from doing the things we actually want to do. And, you know, I don't know. I hope I have a job in 10 years.
Don't we all? Don't we all? But speaking of jobs, what's next for you? What are you excited about? What's coming up for you?
I'm working on a couple projects right now. One of them I'm not allowed to talk about yet, but it's exciting because it's something that everybody knows, and it's season 25. So
there's your big clue. Season 25.
Season 25 is
that's awesome.
It's quite intense that it's come that far. So.
Is this another thing that you were aware of when you were younger, and that's kind of an exciting property to be part of now?
Yes, I definitely watched it when I was younger. And I think a lot of people probably watched it when they were younger. So
that's awesome.
I'm doing a series on YouTube originals. And then I got a thing coming up on CBC with the nature of things. So that's cool too.
Nice. That's great. Awesome. So if people want to keep up with you and you know, say hello or see what's the latest for you, where can they find you online? Are you on socials? What's your website?
I have a website. It's myname.com, Erica Procunier. And my handles for Twitter and Instagram, it's Erica_pro, Pro.
I love it. Erica Pro, because that's what you are. A total pro.
No, that's not why. It's just because my last name is hard to spell. So
that's awesome. Well, Erica, this has been a real pleasure and lots of fun. I'm glad we solved all the problems of the future of the machines taking over, and you know, we don't need to worry about that anymore. Thanks for joining me today. This was lots of fun, and I wish you all the best in your future projects.
Thank you for having me, Adrian. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.